What's up guys, I am Flancon Leche and this is my review of the MetalFish S3 small form factor ITX PC case. I'm going to let you guys know what I like about it, what I dislike about it, and if you should bother wasting your money on a case like this. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to say about this case is that it is a knockoff of the Velka 3. So if you're looking at this case and you're thinking that sure does look like a knockoff of the Velka 3, you're not crazy. It's more of a poor man's version of the Velka 3 though. So I paid around $80 for the case, but by the time I bought all the parts for it, I probably spent around $190 to maybe even $200. And I'll tell you guys why in just a moment, so hopefully you don't make the same mistake. So because of the small form factor of this case, you are going to need a handful of custom parts. In particular, you're going to need a small or low profile CPU cooler, a PCI Express riser cable, and then a Flex ATX power supply that happens to have a 8-pin PCI Express power connector. There's a lot of Flex ATX power supplies out there, but not all of them have that connector for your GPU. And that's, of course, if you plan on using an external GPU with this, which I highly recommend if you are even going to go for a case like this. If not, there's a bunch of other better options out there. Either way, compatibility is something you should definitely look into if you're considering getting into a small form factor case like this. And while we are on the subject of compatibility, let me let you know some of the limitations of the parts you can put inside of this case. So it does take a standard ITX motherboard with a maximum CPU cooler height of a mere 4 inches, and it does take a standard double slot GPU with a maximum GPU length of about 6 inches and a maximum GPU height of around 3 inches. So it does have a lot of limitations in that sense as well. And when it comes to the overall build quality and fit and finish, I'm going to say that this thing is pretty poorly made. So it definitely feels like a couple of slabs of aluminum slapped together and maybe 3D printed or bended into a shape of a case. But there's a lot of sharp and jagged edges, and a lot of where the case meets the side panels and the top panel, there's a lot of openings and creases, and mine even came with a dent in it. So it's pretty poorly made, pretty poorly slapped together. And when you actually touch it, the finishes along the edges they're kind of sharp, and they're sharp and jagged, and you actually can probably even cut yourself on it. So it's definitely something to keep in mind if you really care about that. So now I want to talk about some of the other challenges in building in a small form factor case like the MetalFish S3. So aside from finding the CPU cooler with the right height and the GPU at the right length, I also had a big challenge with managing heat as well as noise. So one thing that I personally cannot stand is a noisy computer. And I found that the MetalFish S3, because of its small form factor, especially with the side panels on, this computer produced a ton of heat and a ton of noise. Now, I found it much better when I would actually take the side panels off and kind of leave it like that. But if you have any animals or you have any children, or of course, if you leave the computer on the floor, it can collect a lot of dust. So that's definitely not one of the best strategies in actually using this case and helping reduce heat and noise. So in order to combat these challenges, or at least attempt to reduce the amount of noise, I decided to, of course, set the fan curves higher so they spin faster and actually dissipate more of the heat, but also I ended up replacing the fans in the system. So I finally did find a CPU cooler that was compatible. That was the Noctua L9HI, I believe the model is. And also I ended up replacing the top exhaust fan, which seemed to be a very basic and generic fan. I ended up replacing it with, I forgot the name of the brand, I'll leave it up on the screen, but it did end up spinning at a much higher RPM. It did not produce as much noise. And then also I ended up replacing the power supply fan with a Noctua fan. So also, once again, a fan that could spin at higher RPMs that's going to dissipate more heat and also reduce the amount of noise that's actually in the system. And actually the power supply fan was the most loud fan that was in our entire system. So it's definitely something to consider if you plan on building any type of system that uses a Flex ATX power supply, but in general, just a small form factor case like this is definitely something you want to think about. So do I recommend the MetalFish S3? Well, I guess it kind of depends. If you're okay with spending a bunch of money on a case that has very poor fitting and finishes, that's very cheaply made, and that also is very hot and loud, well, I'll say, yeah, go for it. But I do think there's a number of other cases out there on the market that could definitely do a better job. Some cases made by Silverstone, also some cases by Cooler Master like the M200. There's definitely some better options out there. I will say none of those other options are backpackable like the MetalFish S3, but I believe if you're on the market for a computer like that, you can just as well go pick up an Alienware laptop that's going to give you that desktop performance in a more mobile form factor. For me personally, I feel like I wasted a bunch of money on this project attempting to make this system more quieter and more efficient. There are plenty of other options out there by other case manufacturers that definitely cost a lot less money, don't have the major compatibility issues, and also are just going to be better served for anything such as a productivity system or even a gaming system, which is what I primarily built this system to do. But that is going to wrap up my review of the MetalFish S3. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below. Once again, guys, I am Flan con Leche, and I am out of here.